Before we dive into the code here, let's take a look at what our sample application is meant to do. We have a very simple sample up here that takes two text boxes that I can enter data in. And you'll see that when I do not have tombstoning enabled and I leave my application and back my way back into it, that now that I've backed into my application, my data has been lost. This is bad because as a user doing some data entry on the phone app, there are multiple different ways that my experience can be interrupted. And if you as a developer don't take this into account, you're going to give your user a bad experience and they're not going to be happy with your app. If they're not happy, they're probably not going to use it. So what we want to do is have the ability that when the user enters some data and the phone leaves your application, becomes tombstoned, you want to be able to save that data to disk. And then when the app comes back up from Tombstone, you want to be able to rehydrate that data to populate your UX again so that the user has a clean experience. How do we go about doing that? So the first thing we want to do is we want to take a look at our structure of our application. I'm using the simple model view model. My view model has a few properties, first name and last name. The underlying data for the view model is off of a person object, which is passed in via the constructor. My person object is fairly simple, has two properties, nothing magic there. I've got what I call a context manager. Context manager is basically a way to store data across my app in memory statically in one location. So I have an active person. So who is my person throughout my application? This context manager is wired up within my app.cs class. This allows me to have global access to it by doing app.current.contextManager. So that's the general overall application. How do I go about saving tombstoning? Well, I have a thing called the Tombstone Manager. Tombstone Manager is going to be responsible for saving my state and rebuilding my state. So let's go ahead and create two methods. Call it save state. We'll call this rebuild state. Both of these are fairly simple. They're going to have about 5 or 6 lines of code apiece. The first thing I need to do to save my state is go ahead and grab the phone application service.current.state object. This is where I'm going to be able to save my data for tombstoning. This is similar to isolated storage, but different. Isolated storage allows me to save data across runtings of my application. Think of it as saving to the file system to a database. The current state is just used for tombstoning. When your app does completely get shut down, you're going to lose this data. So you want to make sure that if you are going to save data to disk, you want to make sure you understand the context you're trying to save it in. If you want to save it across runs, do it to isolated storage. If you want to do it just for tombstoning, do it here. So now that we have our pointer, let's do if phone state contains key, and I'm going to do a type of a person. You need a key, so I'm going to just use the object name as my key. Let's do phone state.remove. So if I have something in state right now, let's go ahead and remove it first. That way I don't overwrite or I completely overwrite something. And then we're going to go ahead and re-add it. And I'm going to say app.contextManager.activePerson to get my person I want to save. So that will save my data to my state for tombstoning. How do I rebuild it? Well, go ahead and grab another pointer to my phone state. Again, I'm going to say if I contain this key, because if I contain it, then I know I can do something. Let's go ahead and pull that data out. Say cache person, and I'm actually going to cast this as a person when I pull it out. That way I'm ensured that I'm in the right object model, because by default the phone state will just store an object. And because I'm doing this cast, I want to go ahead and make sure it's not null. And if it's not null, let's do ahead app.contextManager.activePerson equals cached person. I can now save that back to my memory storage. That essentially is it. That's all I need to do to both save to isolate storage and pull it back out. The real trick is now how do I wire up my phone app to call into this method? Well, if I go back to my app.xaml.cs class, you'll see there's some properties, or I'm sorry, excuse me, events already wired up for you by default. The two I'm going to care about are activated and deactivated. These are what happens when your app goes to the background and gets brought back to the foreground. On the activated, I want to go ahead and create a new instance of my Tombstone manager and say rebuild state. And on my deactivated, call save state. That's it. I'm now wired up to save to and pull from isolated storage. Now the one last thing I didn't show is the way I get to my current value is when my main page is being loaded, I'm pulling out the context from the app and I'm pulling the active person and pushing that into my view model. Let's go ahead and run our app again. So my app has started, so let's go and enter in first, last. Let's go ahead and put a breakpoint on my save state. Let's go ahead and hit the Windows button, send it to the background. I'm getting my save state method now. And if I step over this, you'll see that I am able to save to it. And if I come down to the immediate window, and I call rebuild state, you'll be able to see that I can actually pull it back out again. If I hover over cache person, you'll see I have a first and last name filled, and I can set that to my context. So I've now saved my data to the Tombstone state. I now want to bring it back up again by hitting the back button. So let's go ahead and do that now. So my app has now been rebuilt from isolated storage, and I'm able to see that saving my data to Tombstoning, I can bring it back up again. Now there's one downside with the emulator. It's very hard with the emulator to debug Tombstoning. There are a couple blogs out there that talk you through how to do it. I've never been able to successfully do it via the emulator to have it hit my activated event. If you have a physical device, the simplest way I've found to do it is by invoking the lock screen and then unlocking the phone, because your app's going to stay running in the background long enough while you're doing that to be able to hit your activated and deactivated events appropriately. So again, Tombstoning is extremely simple, but yet extremely critical if you want to give your users a clean user experience. Otherwise, they're going to be upset by doing some data entry and potentially having their lock screen come down or some action interrupt their experience and have to re-enter all that data. So I hope you learned something, and